When systems learn to preserve themselves, governance is often imagined as a simple process. A problem appears, institutions observe it, and a decision is made, action follows. But real governance systems are rarely that simple. They do not merely act. They receive signals, they interpret those signals, they respond, they learn from the response, and then they reorganize themselves around the consequences. This is why feedback matters. A feedback loop exists when the outcome of a decision returns into the system and shapes the next decision. In healthy governance, feedback supports correction. It tells the system, this worked, this failed, this caused harm, this needs adjustment. But feedback can also do the opposite. It can reinforce a bad structure. It can amplify a false narrative. It can reproduce the same decision class. It can justify contradiction after the fact. This is the problem addressed by PII's model of quadruple feedback loop governance. The model asks a simple but powerful diagnostic question. Is the governance system using feedback to correct itself, or is it using feedback to preserve itself? At the center of the model are 4 feedback dimensions. The first is military-industrial feedback. This is the material reinforcement loop. It concerns budgets, contracts, procurement, weapons systems, security institutions, strategic industries, infrastructure, and organizational incentives. This loop keeps the hard architecture of power alive. It asks, who benefits materially from the continuation of the system? The second is media feedback. This is the narrative amplification loop. It concerns public perception, crisis framing, threat construction, emotional salience, legitimacy signaling, repetition, and the stories through which the system explains itself. Media does not merely transmit information. It helps decide what becomes visible, urgent, threatening, normal, or justified. This aligns with PII's broader view that journalism and media function as a public signal system. Shaping crisis perception, legitimacy, and the conditions under which governance action appears admissible. This loop keeps the system publicly intelligible. It asks, how is the system narrated so that it continues to make sense? The third is elite capture feedback. This is the reproductive continuity loop. It concerns the circulation of elites through government, industry, advisory bodies, think tanks, media platforms, boards, donors, regulators, and strategic institutions. The faces may change, but the decision culture remains. The same assumptions return, the same warnings are discounted, the same options are treated as realistic, the same alternatives are dismissed before they become admissible. This loop keeps the system socially and institutionally continuous. It asks, who keeps being selected to define the problem? The fourth is ethical legitimacy feedback. This is the justificatory stabilization loop. It concerns the moral language through which systems defend themselves. Security, freedom, democracy, stability, responsibility, national interest, public value, or the rules-based order. In a healthy system, ethical language constrains power. But in a failing system, ethical language can be absorbed by power. Ethics becomes not a limit on action, but a resource for legitimating action. This is close to PII's distinction between genuine ethical constraint and ethical performance, where moral language may be displayed while power remains largely unconstrained. This loop keeps the system morally defensible. It asks, how does the system convert contradiction into renewed legitimacy? Together, these 4 dimensions form the core of quadruple feedback loop governance. Power perception, reproduction, and justification. Military industrial feedback preserves the material structure. Media feedback preserves the narrative field. Elite capture feedback preserves the decision class. Ethical legitimacy feedback preserves the moral explanation. When these loops operate together, a governance system does not merely respond to reality. It begins to preserve the conditions under which reality is interpreted. To understand this more clearly, PII identifies 5 states of condition. The first state is governance without a feedback loop. In this state, institutions act, but they do not learn. Signals may arrive, reports may be written, complaints may be made, harms may become visible. But the system does not convert consequence into correction. The pathway remains linear. Signal appears, institution responds, outcome occurs, then the system moves on. There is no serious return path from consequence to learning. This is fragile governance. It may look orderly from the outside, but it is blind to its own effects. Mistakes accumulate because the system lacks a disciplined correction mechanism.
The second state is single feedback loop governance. Here, one feedback loop begins to operate. A budget system may respond to cost overruns. A regulator may respond to safety data. A ministry may respond to delivery failures. A military system may respond to operational results. A media system may respond to audience reaction. This is an improvement. The system is no longer completely blind, but it remains narrow. A single loop may correct one dimension while missing others. It may correct cost while ignoring legitimacy. It may correct operational failure while ignoring narrative distortion. It may correct public messaging while ignoring material dependency. It may correct legal compliance while ignoring ethical contradiction. Single loop governance can therefore become technocratic. It learns, but only through the category it already knows how to measure. The third state is dual feedback loop governance. Now, 2 loops begin to interact. For example, military industrial feedback and media feedback may reinforce one another. A security structure produces action. Media narratives frame that action is necessary. The narrative increases public tolerance. Public tolerance protects the structure. The protected structure then produces more action. At this point, governance is no longer simply acting and learning. It is beginning to stabilize itself through a relation between material power and public perception. This is where systems can preserve themselves even when performance deteriorates. The problem is no longer simply that the system made a mistake. The problem is that the system has developed a story that helps it survive the mistake. The fourth state is triple feedback loop governance. Now, a third loop enters, elite capture feedback. The system does not only preserve structures and narratives, it also preserves the people, networks, institutions, career pathways, and assumptions that carry the system forward. Leadership may change, but the logic remains. A policy may be rebranded, but the pathway remains. An institution may be reorganized, but the same categories return. The system appears to reform while reproducing its own operating architecture. This is a crucial point. Governance persistence is not always caused by one powerful actor. It may be caused by the reproduction of decision pathways across time. The same kinds of experts are consulted. The same kinds of institutions are trusted. The same kinds of alternatives are excluded. The same kinds of dissent are treated as unrealistic. At this stage, correction becomes much harder. The system has learned how to reproduce the conditions that created the problem. The fifth state is quadruple feedback loop governance. This is the most advanced and most dangerous condition. The fourth loop enters, ethical legitimacy feedback. Now, the system does not only preserve material power, public narrative, and elite reproduction. It also preserves moral coherence. Contradiction is absorbed. Failure becomes necessity, harm becomes trade-off, delay becomes prudence, escalation becomes responsibility, exclusion becomes realism, inadmissible action becomes unavoidable action. The system learns to justify the gap between what it says and what it does. At this point, feedback no longer serves correction. It serves stabilization. The military-industrial loop preserves the structure. The media loop preserves the narrative. The elite capture loop preserves the decision class. The ethical legitimacy loop preserves the justification. Together, they create a powerful form of lock-in. A locked-in governance system may still receive corrective signals. It may still hear criticism. It may still publish reviews. It may still acknowledge problems. But the corrective signal no longer travels through the system effectively. Instead, it is absorbed, refrained, proceduralized, delayed, or converted into symbolic compensation. The system becomes stable, but stable in the wrong basin. This is where PI's dynamic basin model becomes useful. A governance system can be imagined as moving across a landscape of possible states. One basin may represent healthy correction. In this basin, feedback still returns to reality. Signals are heard, constraints are recognized, classification can change, action can be revised. Another basin may represent compensatory governance. Here, the system is under strain. It knows something is wrong, but it responds through partial fixes, symbolic gestures, and controlled adjustments. A third basin may represent lock-in. Here, feedback no longer restores governance, it preserves dysfunction. The system remains active, but its learning pathways have been captured by its preservation pathways. The diagnostic question is therefore not only, is the system failing? The deeper question is, which basin is the system in?
The deeper question is, which basin is the system in? Is it still capable of correction? Is it compensating for strain, or has it entered a basin where feedback protects the very failure it should correct? This is why quadruple feedback loop governance matters. Many modern systems do not collapse when they fail. They adapt to failure. They narrate failure. They reproduce failure. They morally justify failure. The result is not the absence of governance. It is governance trapped inside self-preserving feedback. This can occur in security systems. It can occur in public administration. It can occur in corporate governance. It can occur in geopolitical strategy. It can occur in media systems. It can occur wherever power, perception, elite reproduction, and justification begin to reinforce each other. PI's model helps us distinguish 5 conditions. Governance without feedback, where action does not learn. Single loop governance, where one dimension corrects, but the system remains narrow. Dual loop governance, where material structure and narrative amplification begin to reinforce each other. Triple loop governance, where elite reproduction preserves the decision pathway. And quadruple loop governance, where ethical legitimacy feedback absorbs contradiction and converts it into renewed justification. The central lesson is this: feedback is not automatically good. A feedback loop can correct a system, but it can also trap a system. It can reveal failure, but it can also stabilize failure. It can restore legitimacy, but it can also simulate legitimacy. It can help governance learn, but it can also help governance avoid learning. The purpose of governance is not merely to receive feedback. The purpose of governance is to ensure that feedback remains tied to reality, constraint, legitimacy, accountability, and admissible action. When feedback serves correction, governance can learn. When feedback serves preservation, governance becomes locked in. And when all four loops reinforce each other, the system no longer merely governs. It governs the conditions under which its own failure can be seen. That is why P studies quadruple feedback loop governance, because modern institutional failure is rarely just a failure of action. It is often a failure of correction. And the future of governance depends on whether systems can still hear what their own consequences are telling them. Quadruple feedback loop governance shows us why modern systems can remain stable even when they are failing. They may not collapse, they may not confess, they may not correct. Instead, they reinforce themselves through power, perception, elite reproduction, and justification. P asks the deeper governance question. Can the system still learn from reality? Can feedback still correct action? Can legitimacy still constrain power? Because when feedback serves truth, governance can recover. But when feedback serves preservation, failure becomes architecture. Philosophical Intelligence Institute. Frameworks turn complexity into admissible decisions.